didn't.
He uses.
I didn't do that because I saw product. I just did that and I went, oh, that's unusual. Hey, did you call Gormley and ask them if they found a controller?
No.
It's probably ought to be the next thing we do, huh?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm playing guitar today or not, huh? I should bring my other bass so I can play that.
What's wrong with the bass here?
I don't feel lonely.
Are you on furlough?
No, not yet. We're waiting for the maybe working capital fund money to run out sometime week after next.
Mm.
Then it will be. Maybe. The boneheads pull their heads out. Just pass the damn CRA so we can keep going. Everything's a fight.
Yeah. When are you gonna break off and become a consultant?
Oh no, I was crunching numbers. If I wait till 65, I'm way better off.
Yeah.
That's not counting the money I could make as a consultant, so, but I don't know how hard I want to work, you know. I don't know if I want to do 50 hours a week and try to kill it for a couple of years, maybe.
Yeah. What else are you gonna do when you retire?
Play guitar.
Yeah.
If I go to 65, I'll be able to, my conservative estimate is retain 88% of my current pay. And at 90, I'll still have 275K in my retirement fund to give to my kids. Well, that doesn't take into account Laura's side of the equation. She's got her own retirement, but it's not nearly as much. The last couple of years, she's been making good money, but we don't need all that to, even to travel and stuff.
Do you guys think you'll travel a lot when you get older?
You'll find a lot.
A few times a year.
Yeah, a couple times a year. Go back overseas a little bit and see Portugal.
Why Portugal?
I don't know. Intriguing. And the area between just north of Italy and east of France, you know, Sweden and Denmark and all that. Yeah, but I have to wait for Laura for that because she's not going to be retired until 7 years after me.
Yeah. Does she do like a 401k?
Well, we've got TSP,
Okay. Which is the government's
the government's
version of that?
Yeah, it's not as much as I would like. Last 2 years have been rough.
Yeah. Yeah, mine's taking a huge hit.
I got back to where I was, but so I get an annuity though, a retirement annuity. It's not all just the 401k. So that's just supposed to be a third of my retirement.
Mm.
It's Social Security, Scottish and Irish.
Scottish.
Scottish and Irish, yep. There might be an Italian in the woodshed, I don't know.
It's probably a good chance, given that Rome was up in that area.
Oh, yeah. That's all mixed up anyways.
Yeah.
This morning I'm reminded of why I don't eat Burger King.
Feeling it?
Yeah.
Fast food in general.
Laura and I were, yeah, generally we don't eat fast food at all.
Well, now you're not really saving much money anymore, because steak and hamburgers are.
Well, I was studying and writing and, I looked up and it's 10 o'clock and Laura was doing, or like 9:45. Laura was doing the same. I said, we haven't made dinner yet. So let's go get something. And she's like, well, that's open. Nothing at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
All right, Burger King usually doesn't. McDonald's gives me a stomachache. I can't eat that ever.
Yeah.
Our go-to is taco time
Oh yeah, Taco Time's actually not bad.
on Wednesdays because it's reasonably fresh.
Yeah. I used to love Taco Bell, but man,
Oh,
it just kills me now.
Well, I told you about the doctor when I got out of the Navy, right?
No.
He looked at my blood work and everything, you know, when I was doing my discharge physical. He goes, you've been eating a lot of Taco Bell. I was like, what? He goes, yeah. There's a special chemical I can tell in your blood work that, I was like, I never ate it again.
Really?
Yeah. That's no lie.
Wow.
I don't remember what it was, what chemical it was. I just was shocked that he could, that they were putting something in their food that stayed in my body that long that it could be
Yeah.
detected by a blood test. I said, that can't be good for you.
Yeah.
Are you taking zinc?
Yeah, I try. I mean, I'm horrible at being regimented on taking pills, but yeah, usually it's zinc and
They're saying that'll keep the spike proteins from having an effect on you.
yeah.
You got a vaccine, right?
I got one. Yeah.
Did you get an mRNA?
Yeah, I got the. I think it was the Johnson and Johnson.
Yeah, that wasn't mRNA.
It wasn't.
That's why I got that one. I guess people who got the mRNA ones are way more susceptible to various health things.
Yeah.
Spike proteins.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to check and make sure they don't hit blood when you give you the shot, and supposedly from the scientists I've listened to, the people administering them were told them not to verify, you know, because usually they'll poke, draw a little bit to see
Yeah.
if they hit vein. They were told not to, so you know that's why some people are having heart issues because they actually hit vein, and you know because it's supposed to stay isolated in the one spot, the vaccine.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Yeah. And so when they hit, you know, vein, obviously it spreads from there. So
I listened to a guy yesterday that was supposedly on the development team, like years before, right? So, I mean, there's something there anyways.
yeah,
But he said it was designed to be harmful on purpose.
really. What's the reason behind that?
Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
I did. I met a son and met
Really?
you lost and found
Oh,
twin
God.
son.
You're not my son, you're my lost and found twin son. funny the first time you said it, if you said it right. Hey,
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, Mindy was funny. Mine.
Good morning.
It happens.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Morning. Good morning.
Good night.
Good night.
Sorry, that was
Oh
real funny.
boy, he's a character. As you know, I'm a woman.
Really. Enough of that.
I have men, half horse.
Can you please just stop?
Oh, someone's getting embarrassed.
No, I'm getting irritated.
Sorry, Mom, I'll stop. And that's blurry, I can't see. Now that's why I
Give
need
me your-
glasses.
Give me your glasses.
So I can see everything else here. That's why I don't need any glasses unless I'm reading something.
Ready.
Or staring at you.
Oh, so Ethan.
Justin?
I know. I'm being like good. Opinions I probably shouldn't be saying.
how's the hand doing?
It's getting better slowly. I'll probably still have to get a shot though.
11. Why so late?
11 a.m. I'm about to take a nap.
You on furlough? Or
5:38
you guys
a.m.
still?
I'm in the accepted status.
That's why I needed a nap,
that?
but I'm good now.
I don't get paid, but I can still work.
Happy to help.
You don't get paid, but you still work.
I like how he phrased it, he can still work. I can still work. It's such a privilege and honor to work for free.
I don't do it for the money, I do it for my country. God.
Makes sense.
Nice.
Do you get
Paul.
back pay though?
Well, if the government ever starts up again, then yes.
Historically.
That makes sense.
What you drinking, Caleb?
Could go on for months though.
It could. It could go on for months. We'll see. This week's kind of vital because, I mean, this is the end of a pay period coming up, so. Will the Democrats, give in or will the
Republicans give in, come to some deal to, you know, open the government back up and get everyone back to work and pay them, or will everyone hold their ground?
I haven't been paying attention. Is this over the budget?
So,
Yes.
yes, so the Democrats, they want to keep a large amount of money, going for a supplement for Obamacare that was, implemented around the time of, COVID. Because everyone was basically told not to work, and it's like, well, we still need medical benefits. So then the government was like, we'll create a supplement and pay you, pay for your health insurance. And now it's like the Republicans are like, we're like years past this COVID event. This should go away. And the Democrats are like, no, you're trying to destroy Obamacare.
Yes, we are.
Do I have that right?
I think so.
In the end, that stupid health insurance only helps certain people anyway. And all the people who are on social security, or who get $200 a month because they can get on social security, have state medical. So it's just stupid.
Depends on what state you're in, right?
No, most states. Most states have,
I don't think Montana does.
Montana does.
Sure?
Yep. They just have a smaller population that actually uses it. But Washington has one of the best states for people who are indigent for medical care, housing, food stamps, and other public benefits. Unless, of course, you're working, then you kind of,
You get hosed.
you can, yes.
The commuters that go over to the other side of the water to work from here are getting hosed.
By,
Well, not only do we get taxed for, you know, the increasing taxes on gas, but the ferry costs have went up. Before COVID hit, I think for a 20-ride pass, it cost $240 to buy a 20-ride pass.
yeah.
They just, this last week or week before, it just increased to $298.
Am I correct in that? Greenwood driving is more, which is something you every month?
Justin, you're yelling.
Hmm?
Oh, sorry.
So that's
You're yelling.
every 2 weeks you're spending
Anyways, yes.
$300, so $600 a month just to
Oh,
commute
it's
on the ferry.
too.
Which is a ridiculous amount of money, especially considering the ferries operate at a deficit anyway, and we continue to operate them instead of.
They multiply, I mean, we put them in dark places.
Yeah.
They procreate.
People would be probably happier to pay a toll
Morning.
if they didn't have to wait for the ferry.
You can't put a bridge across
Yes, you can.
Puget Sound?
You can.
Sure can.
There are a lot of longer bridges out there than that distance for a lot more rough water.
Mackinac Bridge.
Well, don't the ships have to go through? Don't you have to make it high enough for the military ships to be able to
Not the military,
navigate?
the tankers and the
Oh, I
cruise
didn't-
ships, but you can go Vashon Island to West Seattle.
You can also do a tunnel bridge.
Because we know how well the tunnels
I think it's
go.
deeper and longer,
Seattle.
the English Channel's deeper and longer, and they did it there, so.
I'm not sure that would work around here. I mean,
Why?
they've got that silly, you know, train system that they've been trying to like get to go all the way from like,
For me, but it was
what,
like,
Everett or Bellingham or something, all the way down to like Tacoma or Olympia, and it's like, that thing's run way over budget.
Well, there's a difference between, we can't do that and the government's so messed up they can't get anything done. Those are two different things.
I mean, when they spend $3 million on art, of course they're gonna be over budget. Just for a couple platforms.
So I mean, if they can't even manage that mass transit system properly, then, I mean, I don't see how they could really build a bridge or a tunnel.
You know who was really great at mass transit? The Romans.
Actually, we're,
They built really good roads, cause they're still in existence today.
and plumbing.
Bringing it back.
They also created great ways to keep it so that they would have the only market for buggies inside their towns.
But I don't think Justin's been going over, Roman building, projects at all. The road system was pretty much already built by now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
You can build a lot of things when you don't care if they'll ever die and you don't pay them. Just
Yeah,
like our government
when
now.
3/4 of your population is slave population.
Just like you, Paul, who gets to
Fine
work for
slave.
free.
That's our problem, is that we don't have a good system of, slave labor.
Someone who didn't have rights
I
under
think
Rome,
you're talking about the ship.
who was indentured to an owner. I suppose we could get started. I think this is it. Someone.
Let's get cracking.
Oh, I do need microphone. Someone want to open us up in prayer this morning? Holly, would you mind?
Sure. Father, thank you for the opportunity to meet here this morning to learn more about you and the ways that our world should point to you. Thank you for gifting our speakers with wisdom to teach us. Thank you for the other ways that we can serve you. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right. So we left off with Nerva. The Flavian dynasty had ended with Domitian, who was the brother of Titus. And so Domitian, as he grew older, became increasingly paranoid and ruthless. And so he was assassinated, and he was, one of his missions was to essentially remove the Senate. So if you remember, there was a lot of animosity between him and the Senate. So they plotted an assassination. He was assassinated. And then Nerva takes his position as emperor. He was essentially instituted or placed in as emperor by the Senate. So Nerva wasn't really of elite Roman nobility.
Tried, but there was nothing.
Test.
Pretty good here.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Test, test. Yeah, it's working. It's just I gotta figure out the headphones. Okay. So Nerva was generally viewed as a weak emperor. He didn't have really any military experience, but he did carry out a reform of the Fiscus Judaicus that Domitian had implemented. So it was basically a additional tax on those, on Jews. So he reduced the tax or eliminated it. He also practiced mercy, if you remember. So the assassins that had killed Domitian.
Was it being emotional, Dad? I was trying to calm down.
Stop, you're interrupting.
Nerva had released the assassins, and so the Praetorian Guard basically held him hostage until they agreed to find or at least release the name of the assassins that had killed Domitian. So Nerva gives them the names of the assassins, then they execute the assassins. And then as Nerva grew older, he had a stroke, and prior to having a stroke, he named Trajan as his adopted son. So he dies shortly after having a stroke, and Trajan becomes emperor. So Trajan was of Spanish descent. So this would be the first time in Rome where someone outside of Italy is set up as a emperor. So Trajan had worked his way up through the ranks in the military, serving as a general for the legions under Domitian. Trajan spent his first year in office traveling the northeastern territory of Rome, observing the borders, and he realized that war with the Dacians was pretty much inevitable. So the Dacians were Thracian people who were growing in number in the region of what now is Transylvania, Romania, and Hungary. So upon entering Rome and meeting the Senate, who obviously weren't pleased with him because they thought, with Nerva as emperor, they could, continue to basically assign who's emperor. And Trajan was, not one of their picks. So when he entered Rome, he approached the Senate in a humble and modest attitude, and he swore that he would return Rome to the old Augustine model, and he would ensure them that their positions and influence within Rome would not be under threat. So Trajan recruited a famous architect called Apollodorus of Damascus as his chief architect, builder, and scriptor. So Apollodorus would design and build the Trajan Bridge. I don't know if you saw any of these when you were there, but the Trajan's Bridge, Trajan's Forum, the Basilia Uppia, Trajan's Column, the Baths of Trajan, and Trajan's Market, as well as the Ark of Trajan. So a lot of the information we know about Trajan is written on this column, the Column of Trajan. So it's essentially I can look real quick. It's in Rome, Italy, obviously. Via dei Fori Imperiali.
So many monuments there.
Yeah.
Just lose track.
That's true.
So it's basically a storyline of Trajan's efforts wrapped around the column.
I think it's a statue. This is the Baths of Trajan. That's Trajan's Bridge that goes over the Rhine River, I believe. So it opened up, military effort into Germania. And this is Trajan's Ark of Trajan. Huh?
Is that a city gate or just another monument?
It's a monument. So whenever they would win wars, they would enter in through under the Ark.
They put them everywhere.
Yeah.
They didn't even have to be on the street.
Actually, sorry, the bridge wasn't over the Rhine, it was over the Danube. So Trajan also attacked Parthia after they refused to place the Roman-approved king on their throne. So unlike the emperors before him, Trajan was able to easily defeat the Parthian Armenian armies, expanding Rome's territory. In 115 AD, during Trajan's war with Parthia, tensions between the Greeks and Romans, Greco-Romans and the Jews had increased, especially around Egypt and Libya, and in Judea as well, which kicked off the Kaidos War. So hostility in Judea was stoked by Roman legions erecting an idol of Kor on the Temple Mount, and I'll get into this here shortly. So 2 years later, in 117 AD, Trajan grew ill and died. He didn't name a successor. So, in fear of another civil war within Rome, they kept his death under wraps, and Trajan's wife, Pompeia, worked, behind the scenes to set up basically Trajan's cousin or nephew, Hadrian, as his successor. So he was named adopted son of Trajan, and he was set up as emperor in 117 AD. But under Trajan, Rome had expanded to basically its apex. So under Trajan, Roman territory grew to its largest, and then after that would slowly succeed or recess back towards Italy. So as you can see, the green area is the regions that Trajan had brought under Roman control, Roman territory. So a lot of Britannia, parts of Turkey, into Asia Minor. So that was at the height of Rome. So then along comes Hadrian. So Hadrian's of Spanish descent as well. So Hadrian took on an opposite mission. So instead of expanding Rome's territory, Hadrian ordered his legions to withdraw from all the territories that Trajan, in the east, that Trajan had conquered. So basically his goal was to, because at this time, the majority of Roman legions were made up of, foreigners. There was hardly any legions left that were made up of Italians. And, Hadrian was worried that, they were overexpanding themselves. So one of his main missions was to kind of reconsolidate Rome and limit their territory that they ruled over. So as you saw, Rome had expanded into Britannia up north and into modern-day Scotland. But in 118 AD, the province of Britannia suffered a major revolt, and instead of moving north to wipe out the tribes, Hadrian built what's called the Hadrian Wall that runs east to west in northern England. So you can see it's basically the remnants of it still exist in northern England today. And the goal was of that was to basically control who entered and left into Scotland, so that they could manage Britannia better, because the people in modern day Scotland were a rebellious group. Well, that's what's left of it.
2,000 years later.
Yeah.
Oh, so
It was much bigger, and it was all whitewashed. It was this huge white, gleaming white wall that expanded across the whole east to west.
so was it longer than the China Wall?
No. So then, as I had briefly mentioned, the Second Jewish War kicks off. So after the Flavians conquered Judea during the First Jewish War, many of the Jews, which was during the destruction of the temple, many of the Jews who were not killed or sold into slavery fled Judea and assimilated into the local Greek and Roman societies, but they maintained their traditions, which would lead to fear, anger, and resentment. So the locals couldn't understand why the Jews were being so stubborn and tried to force them to change, their culture, while the newly arrived Jews felt hostility and oppression from their new neighbors. And so in 115 AD, a man named Lucas, who was a Jewish leader from Cyrene, which was a province neighboring Egypt to the west, finally decided he had had enough, and he announced that he announced himself as the new king of the Jews, and he was declaring war on his Hellenized neighbors and led a campaign of cultural cleansing. So Greek and Roman temples were destroyed, civic buildings were sacked, and all non-Jewish inhabitants, military and civilian alike, were killed on site. So the revolt soon spread to the neighboring provinces of Egypt, north to the island of Cyprus, and eventually into the newly conquered Mesopotamia, where local Jews attacked Trajan's rearguard garrison. So at the height of the anarchy, Lucas was able to seize control of Alexandria, which Alexandria is here, I believe. Alexandria?
South.
It's in,
It's north.
No, it's up the Nile, south of.
Let me look here.
Alexandria is on the coast, just
Is it?
like if you see the word Egypt and just head straight up.
I meant north. I'm sorry.
Right here. Wrong point.
Africa was a lot larger than that.
The continent of Africa is very large.
the Roman Empire only extended to the very northern portions of Africa around the Mediterranean Sea.
Because that's what they.
Are you talking about the teeny tiny little circle around the word Africa?
Yes.
Country names change as we recognize them. Maybe they called that bit Africa and then had other names for different areas, but
It's the Africans
yeah, there's
with K's. Seriously.
So Lucas was able to gain control of Alexandria, and the city was partially burned to the ground. And remember, Alexandria was the second largest city of Rome. Yes, the Library of Alexandria. I don't believe so. I don't know. I'd have to look.
It was burned like 2 or 3 different times.
The library?
The destruction of the library wasn't a huge one singular incident. There were several smaller arson activities contributing to its demise. Christians were the last ones, fortunately. They felt it was a pagan monument, so they kind of. There's a lot of history left.
So reports have it that upwards of 200,000 Greco-Roman residents were slaughtered by the Jews. So eventually, Trajan was able to defeat the Jews in Cyprus, in Egypt, as well as parts of Judea, although sporadic wars continued into Hadrian's term in office. So as part of Hadrian's plan to consolidate Rome by focusing and moving legions closer to the homeland, Judea also became a major focus. So initially, Hadrian placed smaller legions around Judea to pacify any other chance of upheaval. But in the back of Hadrian's mind, he knew that ultimately he was going to have to do something a little more extreme to bring them under control. So on a trip to Egypt in 130 AD, Hadrian decided to stop. Hadrian decided to stop off at the ruins of Jerusalem, which was heavily depopulated, and he decided to bring the troubled region back to the life by annihilating the last vestiges of Judaism and rebranding the old province as a Hellenistic colony of the Greco-Roman world. So he ordered the devastated Jerusalem rebuilt, the renaming the city Aelia Capitolina. So Aelia comes from his own name, Hadrian's name, and then Capitolina signaled that the city was dedicated to the name of Jupiter. So Hadrian ordered a temple be built on the site of the old Jewish temple. This, coupled with the ban on circumcision, was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. So in 2 years' time, revolts in Judea would once again arise and lead to the Third Jewish War. So in 132 AD, news reached Hadrian that a violent revolt had broken out in Judea, and the Jews had constructed a complex systems of caves and tunnels to offer safe harbor in a guerrilla campaign led by a Jewish leader, Simon Bar Kokhba. And I forgot to read a couple verses here. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Always treat others as you would like them to treat you. That sums up the teaching of the Torah and the prophets. Go in through the narrow gate, for the gate that leads to destruction is wide and the road broad, and many travel it. But it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Beware of the false prophets. They come to you wearing sheep's clothing, but underneath they are hungry wolves. You will recognize them by their fruit. Can people pick grapes from the thorn bushes, or figs from the thistles? Likewise, every healthy tree produces good fruit, but a poor tree produces bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, or a poor tree good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So you will recognize them by their fruit. And then additionally, I wanted to read in last chapter of Revelation. I warn everyone hearing the words of the prophecy in this book that if anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues written in this book, and if anyone takes away from the words in this book of the prophecy, God will take away his share in the tree of life and the holy city as described in this book. So these are two issues that we're going to see throughout these historical events: the rising of false prophets and the adding or revisionary, the plagiarism that occurred within Christianity. So going back to this Jewish uprising, so this individual called Simon Bar Kokhba had announced himself as the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, claiming that he was the one that prophecy had long promised, and that he was going to drive the pagans out of Judea and restore the independent kingdom of Israel. So Simon was able to lead the Jews in almost completely wiping out Roman legions out of Egypt in 133 AD. And by this point, the whole province was in revolt while receiving major support from sympathizers across the country. So Simon declared independence for the new state of Israel, and the Jewish leadership found themselves in effective control of much of the province. Hadrian ordered his best generals to leave Britannia and head straight for Judea, and to pick up as many troops along the way as that was needed. So it took almost 2 years and the death of 600,000 Jews before Hadrian was able to bring the province of Egypt back under Roman control. So after that, Hadrian decided to double down on his plan to eradicate the Jews and leave in their place a Hellenized population of Greco-Romans. So Hadrian's post-war policy was essentially cultural genocide. So he banned the Jews from entering Jerusalem, continued his ban on circumcision, outlawed the Hebrew calendar, and prohibited the use of Torah law. The sacred scroll was carried up to the Temple Mount and burned, and for years afterward, Jewish scholars were executed for perpetuating their outlawed religion. This is Hadrian. So as a final reminder that in Hadrian's eye, Judaism was dead, the emperor renamed the province Syria Palestinia after the Philistines. So this is where we get our name Palestine. So he renamed it after the Philistines, the ancient enemy of the Jews. And it's hard to understate the effect all this had on the future of Judaism. So from 135 on, Judea was no longer the cultural, political, religious center of Jewish life until around 1967, after the Six-Day War. So most historians mark this as the true diaspora at Hadrian's genocide in 135 AD, rather than the Flavian destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So the Jewish community scattered across the Roman Empire were forced to look to an enclave of Babylonian Jews for guidance. So there was, during the first Jewish war, a lot of the Jews moved east into essentially what are Iranians, because they were more accepting of the Jews. So these Jews that were being persecuted looked to what they would call the Babylonian Jews for guidance, who lived within the more tolerant borders of the Parthian Empire. At the end of Hadrian's life, he grew increasingly more paranoid and violent. Seems to be a common theme among the emperors. Being marred with chronic illness, suicide attempts, and executions of his perceived rivals. Yep.
The theory is lead exposure contributed to a lot of that. Lead was used
Yeah.
generously.
Well,
throughout the
there's a lot of theories because he was gay and he had a young
They do that to you.
he had a young boy as his lover who they found dead in the river, and ever since then he
That's just wrong.
kind of lost his mind.
Late stage syphilis will
Because it's
create
like
a
to
lot of
say
this
when you were too about
paranoia.
fruit, they would have
Yeah.
reasonably raped it, which I think is unreasonably unfortunate and etiquette.
And actually,
We're
because
compounding
those
all
lead
those
pipes
things.
still exist, they found that the calcification of the water, because it was so high in mineral content, actually prevented the leaching of the lead into the water.
That's pretty cool.
And
Yeah,
it says
that's
that the
something I learned going to Pompeii.
The calcification occurred so fast that it would have minimized the amount of damage.
But the architects and the masons that were building it all had direct contact
yeah.
with
Yeah,
it
those guys
for
were
The
fine.
they
plumbers,
Yeah.
didn't last
the
very
plumbers
long.
don't last long.
Yeah.
The consumers were fine.
So that's what's going on with the Jews, with Judaism during this time. Let's briefly talk about this Christian movement that's becoming more and more popular during Trajan and Hadrian's time. So, regardless of the persecution by Rome, the Christian movement was growing exponentially as it migrated out away from Judea, the Judean province, into Alexandria, Asia Minor, Syria, Greece. Many of the early believers were merchants who traveled along trade routes, establishing communities in North Africa, Mesopotamia, Armenia, which, just to kind of think about, in Armenia, in 301 AD, Christianity became the state religion. So in a matter of 4 generations, Christianity has spread from a small group within Jerusalem to a state religion in a country that's, I don't know, Armenia's.
Wasn't big.
Yeah. Yep. So spread into Armenia and into Persia. So obviously with such growth comes challenges. One of those challenges was pseudepigraphy. So what's pseudepigraphy? Pseudoepigraphy, sorry. Yep. So the ascription of false names of authors to works. So falsely crediting works to an author who did not write it. So Jeff kind of alluded to some of this.
If anybody wants to read it, I have 2 volumes. What's left of them.
So most Christian pseudoepigraphy originated between 60, 70 AD and 100 AD, with the Proto-Pauline letters being the primary focus. So those are the 7 letters from Paul: Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, and Philemon. Philemon.
Why you left some out? What do you mean proto?
Those are the 7 primary letters that these individuals focused on and pulled information from. So these Proto-Palestine letters were the primary focus, where written letters were attributed to Paul, but were written by later followers after his death. So you have 1st Clement, which is estimated to have been written in 96 AD during the reign of Domitian by an elder within the church at Rome named Clement, even though the letter itself doesn't name the author. There's later Roman historians that make mention of Clement as a bishop within the Church of Rome during this time. The letter claims that Paul established leaders, bishops within both the church at Rome and in Corinth, but both churches had removed such leaders with no charge of moral misconduct. So one of the primary purposes of this letter from Clement was to reestablish these offices of bishops within these two churches. So it demanded that they reinstate these leaders. Then you have the letters of Ignatius, written in 110 AD. And these letters were the Epistle of Ephesians, Magnesians, the Trellians, Romans, Philadelphians, Smyrnians, Polycarp, and Smyrna. So one of the primary purposes of these letters, he modeled his letters after Paul, often quoting, I mentioned these pro-Pauline letters, so he often quoted many of the passages within these letters. So the Protestants later, and I'm sure Jeff probably get into this, the Protestants rejected these letters because they make a huge effort to establish a central governing body over the churches. So already, I think Paul was the last one to die in like 90 AD, around there, 93 AD. Was it John? So, you're not 10 years later, 20 years later, and they're already trying to establish a central managing body over the churches. And one of the primary purposes of that was to fight this, the issue of pseudo-epigraphy. So trying to, minimize or eliminate, these false writings that were becoming more and more prominent. So during this time, around Hadrian's time, Christianity was in an epoch of upheaval and new orientation. So you had, the generation of the first witnesses had died. During this time, church offices for the local church began to take shape. As you may imagine, there were struggles around who should man these offices. So, this is where the office of bishop was established. And then you had the problem of delay of Parousia, which created rifts between churches. So Parousia is essentially, the theology about when Christ returns. There was a huge faction within the churches that believed that Christ was going to return within their time period. Then you had, obviously you had heavy persecution of the Romans. And then the period was marked by both the painful separation from Judaism and the intense conflict with false teachers within their own ranks. So there was a huge rise in false teachers. And then from 2 Thessalonians, I'll read that really quick.
This is recording. So if you're mumbling anything, I can hear you. Dad.
Someone gets here before I do. Let me know. Chapter 2, verse 1 through 3.
Now, brethren, concerning the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by means, for the day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition.
So I think Paul wrote this because, I mean, I think it was already an issue, or he knew that it would become an issue, that there were individuals that used Paul's authority through pseudo-epigraphy, you know, to basically move their position into an office within the church and to gain authority. So that was one of the main reasons why, you know, these individuals like Clement wanted to establish more of a central body to, you know, oppose or battle these individuals that would, you know, come up, claim authority of Paul, and influence the church. So that's important, you know, as we'll get into, you know, the establishment of this universal church, this idea of, you know, a universal church. Even prior to Rome, you know, Constantine, the church was already moving towards that direction. So the development of generally recognized church offices occurred in the period between 80 and 100 AD in order to combat the issue of increasing pseudo-epigraphy. Such offices were given to Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch, and such offices and associated authority had not existed previously to this. So I'm past time, so I will stop there. So, quick recap. So Rome had reached its pinnacle under Trajan. Hadrian takes over, starts consolidating Rome back towards Italy. Heavily persecutes the Jews, basically eliminates Jews or the Jewish culture out of Judea, the region of Judea, and forces them to either, you know, move into Africa or into the Parthian Empire. Christianity is growing exponentially, you know, around the regions outside of Judea, and it's already being marked with or targeted by false teachers, pseudo-epigraphy, and the establishment of central offices.
Starting with Trajan, there's actually 10 emperors in a row that are viciously attacking Christianity, which caused the great dispersion and growth of Christianity, according to most historians.
Yeah. Well, even before Trajan, Rome was persecuting.
Well, Trajan really kicked the ball off, and Hadrian advanced it, and the 8 following are going to keep the same policies. You know, this is where they're feeding Christians to the lions and that kind of thing that you see in the movies and in the
Right.
blood. This is the time period where it's really bad. I don't remember how many years it goes for.
Yeah, we'll go through that here eventually. But you got to remember too, though, prior to that, even, you know, during the Great Fire within Rome, Nero, you know, heavily persecuted the Christians.
So those early persecutions of the Christians around the time of Nero and that, Paul was probably still alive at that point.
Right.
That probably caused him to write about the fact that, you know, hey, you know, don't let these things going on, you know, fool you into thinking that, you know, Christ is imminently coming soon, you know.
Right.
Those are the things that need to happen.
Right.
So then, when you come upon the time frame of Trajan and that, and you start getting these persecutions of Christians recurring again, then it really isn't a surprise that all these writings would start coming back up that, oh hey, Christ is imminently coming back again.
Right. And you don't have the apostles there in person anymore to guide people, instruct them. Now all you have left are the letters that they, had written to the churches, to the people, and so yeah, now, obviously people would take advantage of.
And everyone's going to probably have a different collection of writings
Right.
at this point in time as well, because we're still not at a point where you have one consolidated book of writings.
Right.
So it's whatever writings that you come across. So some people might have, a collection of Paul's writings. Others may have a lesser collection of that and some other letters.
Right.
And then, someone just creates their own stuff.
Right. Yep. Yeah, even baptism became a issue around the turn of the century here. Wanting to start baptized infants, what baptism actually meant. Could you sprinkle?
And then submerge them until they stop.
Yeah.
And let them back up.
All right. That's all I got. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Justin.
Sorry about what?
Walking right there. Bad idea.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. I can turn.
I got everything that's saying on you. I would know everything. Just letting you know.
No, you won't.
You're gonna know everything?
Yep.
Well, not quite everything, but
I would know if you think I'm a narcissist
hey,
or not.
hey.
I
No.
think you're a pain in the butt.
What did Dad say?
That was Mom.
What did Mom say?
I
Pain in
know,
the
look
butt.
at your phone, you'll know everything.
What?
You won't know everything,
Look
but
on
some
your phone.
things, yes.
I don't know everything.
What's your phone say I said, Justin?
What?
What does
Repeat
your phone say?
It says Justin Maxwell is a psychopathic.
Hey,
narcissist.
hey.
Justin, for real, stop.
For
making me
real.
angry.
It just says everything that everybody was talking about.
Better.
It says what Justin K was talking about.
Justin,
What?
look at your phone.
Yes, Mother.
Does it record everything? That's
Yes.
Oh,
even
yeah.
when the app's not open?
No.
What did you say?
Oh,
It's better than Google.
talking about that.
Did
I
you
think
record
I'm
what I
out of
said,
that stuff,
Justin?
so I'm gonna move a little.
Where you go?
Right here.
Oh. Okay.
Be better.
I think he's mad at me.
No,
You mad?
he's not.
No?
I'm
No,
not
he's
even-
just trying to help.
What did I say, Justin?
Mom saying,
What?
Mom saying, what did he say?
It's saying just like our government now,
No,
that
not-
three-quarters
no.
of the population is asleep. Sleep population just like you, Paula, who gets
Oh,
to work
God.
for free.
I'm gonna start throwing stuff at you.
I didn't say.
No, what she said.
You said that I'm out of my mind and I'm crazy.
No, Justin.
No.
Ah.
You-
Okay, one sec.
You're about as funny as that's really your
Oh,
voice.
that was me. I said I was cracking.
Oh.
What did you say, Mom?
I don't know. said you'll know everything, so I'm waiting to hear what everything is.
Oh.
Oh, just people mumbling naughty stuff about me, saying that
Louis,
I'm lying about my
Janelle,
autism and
not
blah
Louis.
blah blah, and I'm pretending
Justin,
this, pretending that.
Justin.
What?
You're making me angry.
What? What? When? Just we'll give it a minute. George. I'm not doing that because I know the truth. And I know the lies, and I'm tired of it. Maybe I do have borderline personality.
Hey, stop it.
A nasty business.
Life?
No, that time period,
Yeah.
for sure. What we got here? See that Pagrapha?
No.
Chanel. I've read that one. Is that a good one?
Yeah, it's alright.
Your drink is right here, Justin.
Huh?
Justin, I said your drink
There's a
is
phone
right
right
here.
there. What's new, Ryan? The usual. What's the usual? Nothing. Nothing. Same old, same old.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just dealing with stuff at work mostly.
Same old problems, but now you're just not getting paid for it.